So you're going to teach it over here, great.
Yeah, we also have a Zoom option for. We also have a Zoom option for people that can't make it to the synagogue. So that's why I have this set up in front of me also.
Well, a friend of mine's supposed to be on there too.
Amazing. What's your name?
A couple of names in my patient, my friends.
So I don't hear well or see well, so I want to sit next to you.
Okay, that's good.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, what's your name?
My name is Tulio.
Tulio.
Tulio Genola.
Oh, beautiful. Tanya.
Nice to
Rabbi
meet you.
Tani. Nice to meet you.
Hello.
Hello.
And what is your name? I'm
Miranda.
sorry. Last name. And that's Julia. So you're going to teach the real Kabbalah? Because I studied it many years ago.
Oh, really? So we're definitely gonna address a lot of parts of Kabbalah. It's gonna be a nice mixture of.
So I don't mind this device. I hear better with it. So I'll put it on the table.
Amazing. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We'll wait another 30 seconds, and then we'll jump in. We're here at the synagogue. The lovely audience here, and we have, thank God, a lot of people here also. So really happy. I always say that it's my preference is always people come to the synagogue, but obviously it's hard. So that's why we have the Zoom option. So we're happy that everyone that couldn't make it is able to join with Zoom. Okay, we'll wait another 10 seconds. The best is if everyone can mute themselves until they want to ask a question or something, then you can unmute yourself. But best is if you mute yourself. Okay, here we go. So we tell a story of a famous rabbi, lived in Ukraine. Actually, I was at his gravesite in Berdichev. His name was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. He's known as the Berdichever. The story goes that he got married, and as the custom was then, a big sage, when he got married, his father-in-law would help him cover his expenses. He would go to yeshiva for a few months after the wedding, and he would go for a few months, a few years even, to dedicate time to learn, to start off their married life in a very spiritual way, and then they would come back. Now, he obviously wanted to do this, but he was a great scholar. So his father-in-law thought, I'll maybe I won't have to pay. I'll just, you already know everything. So what do you want to go to this yeshiva for? So he said, I want to go to a specific rabbi. And his name is Reb Dover of Mizrich. I want to go to him. He said, why do you want to go to him? He said, I want to go. I really, really want to go. Let me go. Okay. So you know what? Fine. He said here's what you're supposed to do. So he went, and he went off to Berdichev for 6 months. Said, try it out for 6 months. We'll see what happens. He goes to Berdichev. 6 months. He learns. He loves it. Comes back. His father-in-law, has his smirk on his face. Let's see what you came back with. So so he asked Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. He asked him, what exactly did you learn there? What did you pick up over there? So he said, oh, you know what I learned? You know what I learned in Mezrich? I learned that God exists, that there's a God. So the father-in-law was really annoyed, really upset. He's like, what? You had to go to Berdichev, be there for 6 months away from your wife to learn that God exists? He's like, hey, let me show you something. He calls over, he sees the, Chana, the maid servant right there, cleaning the house. Calls her over. Says, Chana, come here. Let me ask you a question. Does Hashem exist? Is there God? And she says, yeah, of course. What do you mean? Of course God exists. So his father-in-law turns to Rabbi Yitzchak and he says, oh, look, you see, even the maidservant says that God exists. You didn't have to go to Mizrich for that. What was that for? So he said, aha, it's a big difference. He said, this maidservant, she says God exists. I know God exists. That's the difference. That's the difference. And with this story, I I think, bring out the main point we're going to speak about today. There's a big discussion when it comes to the mitzvah, the commandment to believe in God. So if you think about it, it's a funny mitzvah. You know, it's either you have a relationship with God or you don't. You can't mandate someone to have a relationship. Meaning, if someone doesn't believe in God's existence, then there's no such thing as mitzvahs to begin with. There's no such thing as commandments to begin with that you're going to tell him, oh, you have to believe in God. He doesn't even, if you don't even believe in God to begin with, then there's no mitzvah at all. There's no one commanding the commandments. So it doesn't make sense. And that's what the Barbanel, one of the Spanish and Portuguese commentaries, I think it was in the 14 or 1500s, he actually said this, that there's no mitzvah to believe in God. There's no such mitzvah. Now, how could you have such an argument? So I just want to clarify something, that it was known that there's 613 mitzvahs. There's 613. But what are the 613? That it doesn't say clearly. This is a mitzvah and this is not. So when it comes to counting, what are the 613? That is something that can be argued upon. And Barbanel says, oh, this mitzvah to believe in God is not one of the 613. It's something it comes before all the mitzvah. It's the foundation for all the mitzvah, but it can't be counted in the 613 because it doesn't make sense. You can't command someone if there's no commander. That's his opinion. Now, Maimonides, the Rambam, he doesn't suffice with this. He doesn't accept this. He says, look, what's the first one of the 10 commandments? Anochi Hashem Elakacha. I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of Egypt. So, and that's the first one of the 10 commandments. So what is that? So we have to understand what is this commandment exactly? The logic of the Barbanel, that it doesn't make sense to command to believe in God. Doesn't make sense. So what is this mitzvah? So he says, this is the mitzvah. The mitzvah of believing in God is like this, is to know God, to know everything you can know about God, and whatever is beyond knowledge, whatever is beyond logic, whatever is beyond understanding, that you have an obligation to have faith and believe, right? No. Faith and logic, faith and intellect are two different tools we have to relate to something. We can either take it in a logical process and then it will be understood and known, or you could take it in a way of faith. I believe this. I don't understand it, but I believe it. So this mitzvah has two parts to it. It has the part of the mitzvah to know God, to know that God exists, and we'll talk about that soon. And another part of that mitzvah is to have faith in whatever is beyond understanding, to have faith that is true about God. That is the mitzvah. So what we see is that there's an obligation, we have an obligation to get to know God as much as possible, to understand God as much as possible, and to know where that line is. And that line that tells us, oh, this is the line where I understand, up to here I understand, and now past that is faith. And past that I have to use the tool, so to speak, of faith. It's something beyond understanding. And that's the mitzvah. We have an obligation to do that. If we can do that, that is called pure faith. What we mean by pure faith is that not just that you believe in God just because you're like almost not in a bad way, but like we're lazy, we're not really thinking about it, but we know God as much as possible, we know him as well as possible, and then we have faith. That's pure faith. And that is the goal of this section of the Tanya that we're going to learn. We're learning actually the second part of the Tanya. The first part of the Tanya, I plan on getting to starting when the season in Palm Beach will start. But so I kind of chose a smaller part that we're going to learn, the second part of the Tanya. Now, what's interesting is actually, I wasn't planning on saying this, but I'll say it quickly, is that the Alter Rebbe, the author, the first Chabad Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Lubavitch. He actually was the Rebbe before the movement even moved to Lubavitch. He originally planned on putting this as the first part of the Tanya, this section as the first part of the Tanya. Eventually, he changed it for reasons we don't know. We can make theories, but we don't know for sure what the reason is. But the point is that it is something that can be a first step of learning also. It doesn't have to be the second part. He himself planned on putting it in the beginning. And there's evidence of that. You see sometimes he writes like, I'm going to explain later, but it really wasn't the first part. Because you see that when he wrote that, he had in mind that what he was writing would be the first part, and later would be that. So that is, and the name of this section, the second part of the Tanya, is called Shari HaYichud VaEmunah. The Shari is the gates of Yichud, of unity, and Emunah, and faith. And the goal is to bring out, like we said, what is to have pure faith, to know as much as we can about God, and to show, whatever's past that is past the line of logic, past the line of understanding, and that's faith. And that's the goal of this section. So I know in the title, when they wrote Tanya, they actually wrote Kabbalah of the soul. Now that is true, but that would be more accurate for the first part of the Tanya. In this part of the Tanya, we're going to end up really more talking about the Kabbalah of the world, or the Kabbalah of God himself, which is one with the world, which we'll get to. That will come out as we go along. So I want to give some context before we jump in. Again, the goal is, what we need to know is what do we know about God, and then go back to and find out what do we have faith in. So the Alter Rebbe quotes his teacher's teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, the person that started, the man that started the Hasidic movement. And he says something novel that kind of was introduced in the times of the Baal Shem Tov. And what I'm going to do is try to give a little context, a little background, and then show what he's saying is new. What the Baal Shem Tov himself said is that God is constantly recreating the world. Now, that's something that's wasn't taken for granted, because in what people always thought was like this. There's kind of three steps to get to this. First step is, like we said, that you believe in God. Now, most people have an easier time with that, is because look at the world. The fact that the world exists means that there's a God. The fact that the world works so perfectly and there's so much synchronization in the world, that tells us that there's someone that put this together. It's very hard to deny that. And the classic story that's used for this step in the Gemara, in the Talmud, I can't seem to remember the names right now, but the story, it goes like this. There was once a Talmudic sage, and he was with the non-Jewish king or government leader in that area where he lived. And they were debating, God exists, not. They were having a whole back and forth. And the non-Jewish government person was saying, I think that the world just is here, was always here. No one put it together. That was his position. Okay. He wasn't trying to argue with him too much. Fine. But then what happened was the person got called. He had some issue he had to deal with that was going on in the city, in the state, in the country. And he left the table for a minute. And what happened was the sage saw there was a little bottle of ink on the table. So what he did was he took that ink and he painted a beautiful picture. He painted a beautiful picture while the person was away. Okay, the person comes back and he sees, wow, look at this beautiful picture. Look at this beautiful drawing. This is amazing. Who did it? So the sage turns to him and says, no one did it. The bottle of ink was knocked down and out came this drawing. How came this picture? So the person was like, you're being ridiculous. Obviously, that's not what happened. You don't just knock down ink and all of a sudden it all lands in the right place to make a beautiful drawing, obviously. That's ridiculous to say. So the sage is like, I got you. Same thing with the world. The world is so perfectly organized, synchronized. It's very hard, it's unfathomable to say that God did not put this together, that it would just happen randomly. You must say that there's a being that organized this together. So, and this is something that you can come to with intellectual process, meaning you see a world and the only logical answer how this was put together is by a being that's beyond the world that made it happen. So we know that God exists. We don't just have to believe that, it's something we can know. Something a conclusion we can come to. So that's step one. God being an organizer, if we want to put it like that. The second step is it's a further belief about God, or here we're going to say thought about God, is that God created the world from nothing. Yeah, the ex nihilo would be the common phrase, something from nothing. Meaning, in the first step, you could say, similar to let's use the story as an allegory. Yeah, you have the ink. The ink was there. What the sage did was that he organized the ink, so to speak. He put the ink in the right spot to make it a beautiful drawing. So the ink already existed. He used what was there, what is in existence already, and organized it in a certain way. The next step is to say not only that God organized the world, but you could say that maybe he had some sort of matter that he had to work with, similar to, let's say, pottery. You can make a beautiful vessel, but the clay was there. And the next step is to say that God created something from nothing. I mean, he created the world out of nothing. What this really means is that God created the world not from nothing. He created the world from himself, which is going to be a very, very important point to bring out throughout this series. But that's already a next step. That also a lot of people agree with and understand. But where the Baal Shem Tov comes in, and what he introduces, is that not only God created the world out of nothingness or out of himself, he constantly recreates the world. He constantly has to create the world. It's not something that he did once and now it's just left to be. He has to constantly create this world. That's what the Baal Shem Tov says. That's something new that he introduced to Jewish thought. An example that's given would be like electricity, just to make it a little more tangible. Electricity, it's something that is, it's constantly keeping the lights on. But once you turn it off, you shut the current down, it's off. The lights need constant feeding of electricity to work. So similar to the world needs this constant godly energy being infused in the world in order for it to stay in existence. And we're going to say today in this first chapter of this section of the Tanya that if God stopped recreating the world, if God's energy stopped flowing into the world would cease to exist. Not that you have to just the world will be destroyed, meaning maybe a fire comes, a flood comes and destroys the world. No, the world would just cease to exist, and so much so as if it never existed. Yeah, there's a big difference between something that exists, it was brought into existence, let's say glasses. I'll give you an example. You have glasses, you have the glasses, and they're broken, so now there's no glasses anymore. But the way the glasses are after you broke it compared to the way it was before is obviously very different. It's not the best example, but I'm trying to bring out this point that the world can be created and maybe also cease to exist, but it could be in a way that, there was a world, it's just not here anymore. But that's not the way God created the world. The way the world actually is that if God's energy would not be here, would not be invigorating the world, then the world would cease to exist as if it was never here. That's what the Baal Shem Tov says. Yes.
They've pretty much shown that with what is commonly known now as the Big Bang Theory. We came from nothing in the first microseconds; it just appeared.
Yeah. So it's interesting to bring up. Someone here brought up the Big Bang Theory, and that's I've seen many people that incorporate that in Jewish understanding, but we're not gonna. We don't want to go there.
I didn't want to raise that. I just wanted to posit that what we've discovered parallels what we understand.
Yeah. There's a lot that you can compare contemporary science to what we will discuss. I'm not a scientist, so I try to stay away, but I might bring in some things that I've read that people compare. Okay. Again, so what we established is the Baal Shem Tov's contribution to historic understanding of God's creating the world is that God has to, not only that he organized the world, not only that he created the world from himself out of nothing, like the world, there was no matter that he used to create the world, it was just himself. And the third point is that this creation he has to constantly recreate. Okay. Now, how does he constantly create the world or recreate the world? That is something that we're going to discuss in this chapter also. So here I want to give again context to the way it was commonly understood, and where this part of the Tanya and the Baal Shem Tov's contribution really adds a whole new way of looking at creation. So this is going to be a little more philosophical. There's the idea of theism. Theism means, that there's a God, but the way it was always understood is when that God is beyond, is perfect, is a perfect being. He's totally beyond our world. The aspects that are always attributed to God is he's always existent, he's eternal, he doesn't change, he's almighty, he's all-knowing, he's supremely good. He creates everything, but he's separate. He's distinct from the world. He's such a great being. He's totally beyond the world. He doesn't work to put the two together. Our world and God would not work together. That's theism. Again, that God is so great. He's like beyond the world. Totally beyond. There's no way to relate to God. Now, people obviously aren't so comfortable with that. It's not so harmonious to say that, because then the world that we're living in is totally separate from godliness. So then came a new line of thinking called pantheism, which means that God is identical with the universe. God is the universe. The universe is God. So on the one hand, this leads to a very deep reverence for the world. And it also helps us look at God as something that we can, encounter daily and directly, because he is in the world, which is something that helps, we feel better about and maybe be more pure about. And it's definitely more like, it gives nature so much more beauty and so much more meaning, etc. But what happens with this approach is that what comes out from this is that God is the world and nothing more. That's what comes out from this. Again, theism is that God is like so perfect, totally beyond, we can't relate to it. The world has nothing to do with it. Now this was the opposite approach. They wanted God to be relevant. They wanted to have a relationship with God. They wanted to be able to relate to God. So they made God so relatable that it almost like is not God anymore. Meaning he's not beyond the world. Now this method, again, people wanted to go in this line of thinking because they wanted to feel God. They wanted God to be relevant in their lives. But the way I would call this is like transcend and reject. You didn't like what was before, so you reject it and come, go above it and come up with a whole new way of looking at it, a whole new way of thinking. The example, the expression that's used is like you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Meaning you're trying to get rid of the bathwater, but you threw out the baby also, God forbid. Meaning they said, yeah, God's relevant, but they took away the God out of God, almost, so to speak. God is not as great as he, according to this way of thinking, as he really is. So here comes the Hasidic approach, which we're gonna get through within these chapters. The word I found for this is panentheism, not pantheism, panentheism. It's from the Greek words pan and theos, all in God, meaning everything is within God. On the one hand, God is distant, supernatural. He's the first being, he's beyond the world. But at the same time, the world finds itself within God. It finds itself within a transcendent divine reality. So, in other words, what that brings out is that even though God is beyond the world, but he's not separate from the world. The world is within him. The world is, if it's anything, it is part of God. It is godliness. We're going to get to this at length. We're not going to go through it. We're not going to be able to get to it this week. It's going to be chapter 2. The Alter Rebbe will logically go through this idea that God needs to constantly create the world. And in chapter 3, he'll come with the conclusion from this, and that will help us redefine reality, so to speak. It's a little head spinning when we get there. But that is again, that is also the context of where we're coming from. Again, there's theism. God is beyond the world. That led to pantheism, which is that God is the world, kind of in a certain sense. And then there's panentheism, which we're going to try to say is that God is beyond the world, but at the same time, the world is not separate from God. And you can find God within the world. Now, this is something hard to really relate to. And the way we say this is through the idea of understanding creation itself. How did creation happen? If you open the Bible, in Genesis, the beginning, what's the first thing we see there? It says, Bereshis bara Elikim, it says, Shemayim v'sa'ar. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it goes through, if you look in there, it says how God spells out there should be the heavens, there should be the earth, there should be the sun, the moon, the celestial beings, the water, the water should be divided. We call these the 10 utterances. In Hebrew, it's called the Asara Ma'amaris, the 10 utterances. That's what they're known as. All the Yehi, there should be this, there should be that. There's 10 of them. If you go through this, if you count, there's 10. It was 6 days, but 10 utterances. And that's how God created the world. That's what we know. Now again, we'll give a little context of how people understood these utterances. This won't be as extensive, but the simple way of understanding these 10 utterances is that God spoke. He made these statements of what should happen. It's like instructions. Yeah, I'm sure we all, and everyone, whether it's in our job or other places where you instruct our children what to do, and then they do it. That's a typical, when you say something should happen, it means that someone is going to take that and act upon it. So that's a simple way of understanding. God said this is what should happen, and then somehow it happened. It doesn't say how it happened, but then it happened. That's the simple way of understanding the 10 utterances. But what we're going to say is that the 10 utterances themselves, that is the, so to speak, the raw material that the world was created from. It wasn't an instruction, rather it was the process of creation itself. The world exists from these 10 utterances. That is what we're going to say. Now, this is something you don't necessarily see in Jewish thought. You can find one medrash that says that creation is powered by a divine name. Again, not the 10 utterances, a divine name, that's something else. Another medrash will say God created the world after looking in the Torah. It says God looked in the Torah, and from that he created the world. Yeah, which classic parable, allegory for that is like a blueprint. Yeah, Torah is the blueprint for the world. That's why, on a side note, that's why it's always said Torah means, hara means lesson. Why can we take lessons from the Torah how to live our life in this physical world? Because Torah is the blueprint for the world. So if Torah is the blueprint for the world, if you look at the blueprints and you see what's behind everything, how it was made, what was the ideas behind it, then you can very much apply it in the actual world itself. That's a side point, not discussed here, but just that idea that Torah is the blueprint for the world. And that still doesn't say clearly that the utterances themselves became the world. The utterances themselves became the world. Baal Shem Tov, he's the one that introduced that, like we said, the 10 utterances, that itself is what creation comes from. That is from what the world is formed. The place where you will see this idea is in Sefer Yetzirah. Now, I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar, but Sefer Yetzirah is the oldest, probably the oldest Jewish book, period. It's claimed to be authored by Abraham himself. It's claimed to be authored by Abraham. Obviously, I've seen it doesn't mean necessarily that he wrote it and it was a book that they had, but definitely the content of Sefer Yetzirah was something that was authored by Abraham and was kept within the Jewish tradition and nation, obviously only with select few, and now we have it in a printed form. It's Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer means book. Yetzirah of formation, of creation. It's the book that describes how the world is created. It's very Kabbalistic, esoteric. I can't even count on my hand the amount of times I open that book. It's something that can't just be read like on its own. A lot of Kabbalistic personalities wrote a commentary on this book. It's the classic book to write a Kabbalistic commentary on. Now, in this Sefer Yetzirah, he writes, it speaks about this idea of that the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, that is what the world is comprised of. What does that mean? Just to make it, again, a little more understanding or fathomable. Not that I am not a computer scientist at all. I don't really understand how it works, but a computer, even though we see, like, it seems like there's an app and there's a video and there's everything, but really it's numbers. It's really just numbers. That's what's really behind it. So similar to that, the world is really just a combination of letters. That's what it is. Another example that maybe just I was going to say it later, but I'll bring it in now for a second, is the world matter, say, is really a bunch of spinning electrons, etc. Again, this is not to get into the science, like we said, we don't want to get into, but you can understand that even though it looks like one thing, it's really what's driving it, what's behind it is really what forms it is really something else. And we'll talk about these things more as we go through this book. Again, so we spoke about this whole idea of the divine utterances creating the world to bring out this idea of panentheism, like we discussed before. What does this have to do with saying that the world is created by divine speech? Because if we can use this metaphor of speech, it will make it pretty clear. On the one hand, like we said, the world is really just a development, a manifestation of divine speech, of the divine words. But on the other hand, it's just divine words. It's just a few of the divine words. Think about it. A person, they can say a sentence, a paragraph, a whole class, but you cannot compare that to, how much they can speak, their ability to speak. And that you can't even compare that to the ability to think, and you can go on and on. It's minute compared to the capabilities and abilities and potential of the soul of the person. So if we can use and understand creation through divine speech, that lets us understand that even though the world is a manifestation of God, divine speech, it still doesn't encompass the entirety of God. It's just a few words of God. God is really beyond, way beyond that. That's something that's brought out from this the Baal Shem Tov saying that this is the way creation works. Again, we have the two aspects, and we kind of combine the benefits of theism and pantheism. You have that God is totally beyond the world. At the same time, you have that the world is a manifestation of God. And that is brought out through saying that the world is created through divine speech. Okay, so this is all introduction. We touched upon a few things that the chapter discusses, but this is all introduction. Now, if you look at the first page, the opening page of this part of the Tanya, it says what we're going to do here is I'm going to say it in Hebrew because I love it. It says lahavin ma'at miz'er, to understand a little bit of a little bit. The idea that the verses of Shema Yisrael, we know the famous verse, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Now, just because it's in this week's Torah portion, so I wanted to read something to you about this verse before we jump into it. So, we know that the Shema is one of the most famous of Jewish prayers. We know that Jews that were unfortunately killed for being Jewish throughout history, these were their dying words. Beautiful. These were their dying words, always. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And what is the translation? Let's first start with the actual translation of the verse. The Lord, Hear, O Israel. The Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So I just want to, last summer, Hindi and I were blessed to be able to go to Portugal for the summer, for quite a few weeks. We ran a Jewish day camp there. It was a beautiful experience. And in this day camp, the rabbi that's behind the Kabbalah institution there that organizes day camp, he's unfortunate there aren't many Jews there today in Portugal, but we know that Portugal has so much Jewish history. So he very much tries to bring that out and so people can see. So he made this book. It's called Jewish Voices from Portugal. And what he has is every Torah portion, he has two quotes from different Portuguese rabbis on that week's parsha. Okay, so this week's parsha is Ves Chanan, and it has the verse Shema Yisrael. So he has a piece here from one of the rabbis about this verse, and I want to read it to you. Not to get stuck on it, but I want to read it to you. One can wonder, however, why the Torah needs to single out one verse. With the Torah's vast amount of wondrous ideas and teachings, is there truly a need for one part to be highlighted so prominently? Rabbi Avraham Saba, who experienced the expulsion from Spain and then the expulsion from Portugal. We know that historically that's what happened. The Jews were first sent out of Spain, so they said, okay, let's go to Portugal. It's nearby, and they let him in. Then, long story, there was a marriage, a royal marriage, and the Portuguese also officially expelled the Jews. But they wanted the Jews to stay, so they kind of forced them to convert. But as many people are able to got out from Portugal. So think about such a life. They grow up, everything's good in Spain. All of a sudden they're sent out, and then they set up in Portugal, and they're sent right out of there also, expelled from Portugal also. So this Rabbi Avraham Saba tells us what he learned about the words of Shema and what this prayer meant to everyone in those trying times. This is a direct quote. The Torah foresaw the tragedies and decrees that would be issued against the Jewish people, forbidding Torah study. As what happened during the expulsion from Portugal, public study and teaching children were outlawed. Books were confiscated and synagogues were destroyed, so that people could not pray or study Torah. Torah was almost forgotten. For how can you teach without books and without teachers? All that remained was to teach and transmit the Shema Yisrael, to know that God is one. That is why God gave us this prayer, a short prayer which includes the entire Torah. What Reb Saba is telling us is that while everything else can be taken away, Shema Yisrael, which is this short and special prayer, is part of our very essence and therefore can never be separated from us. The perseverance of these generations, and he's writing it in a present tense. This is what was actually happening at that time. So the perseverance of these generations, the sacrifice of their heart and soul is not just another chapter in our history, but primarily a message to us. Shema Yisrael, which means hear Jews, hear Israel. Let us do all we can in the spirit of devotion to God, with all our means, our synagogues, our books of Torah, our institutions of Jewish learning, to honor the memory of those who came before us and continue in their ways. I'd rather just to bring out the importance, the weight, the prominence of this verse, Shema Yisrael. Now, the Zohar, the Kabbalah, the main book of Kabbalah, which by the way it was said by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and then it was written down later. It's written there like this: that the verse Shema Yisrael, which finishes off Hashem Echad, God is one, that is referring to a high, it calls it Yechuda Ilah, a higher level of unity. Then we know the story. What's the verse? Hero Israel is actually a quote that the 12 tribes told Jacob at his deathbed. Hero Israel, which is referring to Jacob, his other name. Yeah, the Lord is one. Lord our God is the Lord is one. You have to show him that we're still staying with the monotheistic faith, etc. Like you raised us well. In other words, that's what they were telling him. And it says that Jacob replied with this verse that we say in the prayers: Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuso L'Olam Vad. Blessed be the name of his kingship forever and ever. So the Zohar says that this verse is also referring to the unity of God, but it's a lower level of unity of God. Again, so the verse Shema Yisrael is a higher level of unity, and the verse Baruch Shem is a lower level of unity. Now, just to show how you see that in the actual verse, in Shema Yisrael, it says clearly, Hashem Echad, the Lord is one. In Baruch Shem, you don't see that the Lord is one, but it said that the word Va'ed at the end, if you switch up some of the letters, which if we'll have time, we'll talk about how switching letters works, but you'll end up with Echad, the same word as the Shema Yisrael. But the difference is that that one is, it says that God is one clearly, and one it's like you have to switch the letters to get to that conclusion. It shows that it's already a lowering, a lower level of unity. That's what the Zohar says. So the Alter Rebbe says when he opens up this part of the Tanya, he says we're going to try to understand a little bit of what this means. In chapter 7 is where he'll actually really get to this and address it directly. Everything until then will be a build-up. I don't want to spoil it, so I'm not gonna. I won't get into it. But we'll get there in the right time. Just to bring out this idea of different levels of unity and what does that even mean. So this is I saw a very interesting example. I hope I could give it over properly. This is the example that's given. When someone talks, when someone produces sound, there's a sound wave, and there's two ways to kind of catch it. There's two things that can happen to this wave that we're going to talk about. You can have something like a radio, which kind of converts the sound into electronic signals, and then can produce the sound again. Another way of doing that is you can have a record. Yeah, I'll just use an old example. You have a record, just because it's more, you can see it clear. You have a record, it can record sound and make it into, ridges in the record, in the big disc, the big record disc.
In the vinyl.
In the vinyl. Yeah, I don't know. These
No,
words are
I don't wanna confuse
pre my times. But so you see, can be two ways. You know how this speech from someone's mouth can be manifested in two different ways. That's already, you see one way of how one thing can, be manifested in different ways. One's like almost like hard physical, change in a disc, and one is electronic signals. Then you can have someone that can look at a book of notes and like read and they have musical notes and read it like a book. If someone's gifted enough to be able to do that, they can for them, like the sound, the music is something they can just see without even needing to be heard, without it needing to be put, in electronic signals or in a vinyl, in a record. A gifted person can see, the actual, can see the notes themselves, can see the sound itself, so to speak. So I'm just I'm using this as an example to bring out how there can be it could be the same thing, or at least the same source, and it can be seen in different ways. And you might have to be gifted to see it in that more pure form, in that more pure way. You might have to be gifted for that. But that brings out this idea that it could be a higher level of unity, a higher level of reality, and a lower level of reality, even though we're dealing with the same thing. And the goal, hopefully, is that throughout these chapters, we'll really be able to become, so to speak, this gifted person. To go through the proper steps to be able to actually maybe see it from a different perspective, a higher perspective. Be able to be sensitive to maybe a higher, more refined, more true, more pure reality. Obviously, I hope we don't expire from ecstasy or from spirituality. We stay here. I'm not worried, but that will be the goal. So now I'm just going to go through the actual chapter itself. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to say every detail. You can read it on your own, but I'll go through the main ideas. And if anyone wants the actual text, you can let me know. My email is Tanya at Palm Beach Synagogue, TANI at palmbeachsynagogue.org. You can reach out to the office. I'm sure you can find a way to reach me. So like this, there's a verse. It says, "La'olam Hashem dvarcha nitzav b'shamayim." La'olam means forever. It's referring to God, Hashem. Your word is situated in the heavens. What does that mean? What word of God is situated in the heavens? So, not to get too at length, I don't want to run out of time. The Baal Shem Tov uses this verse to say his point. That, you know what it's referring to? What word of God is within the heavens? La'olam, forever, constantly. It's the words Yehi Rakia. It's the word of the 10 utterances. That God said there should be the heavens, there should be Rakia. Those words is what's Nitzav, is situated and standing, so to speak, constantly, forever within the heavens. That's how he interprets this verse. And this is the verse he uses to show that God is constantly creating the heavens. And if this word of God, the Hirakia, would leave the heavens, then the heavens would cease to exist. And not just not exist anymore from now on. Like we said before, it would cease to exist, meaning as if it never existed. Because there would be no concept of God created the concept of time. God created the concept, created everything. So if God's power and creative process would be drawn back, it would be as if it never existed. That's what he says. Now, this is a fact. We're going to take this as a fact. By the way, it's just an interesting idea. The word Kabbalah means, in Hebrew, it means tradition. Or maybe a more precise translation, it means received, which tradition is received from one generation to the next. So Kabbalah was really more about, it was passed down, and this is the facts. This is like, maybe this is what's behind the universe. This is what's really going on, but it was passed down. And a lot of times it was beyond understanding. And it, to much of an extent, it still is. So that's how we're going to take it for this week. We're going to take it as a fact that God is constantly recreating the world. The logical process, how do we get to this conclusion, will be next week. That we'll speak about next week. That is the topic of the second chapter. Okay, so just don't want to, if anyone has any questions, why does God need to constantly create the world, etc. That will be addressed next week. But he says again that God constantly recreates the world. Now, there's a question that can come up, very simple question, that what is recreating the world? God's 10 utterances. But if you think about it, there's 10 utterances only refers to, I don't know, the very, very select a few beings. It doesn't refer to everything. The heavens, the earth, the sun, the moon, man, animals, vegetation. I'll give you an example of something that's not in there. First of all, every specific type of animal, every specific type of vegetation, all this is not mentioned. Another example, like a stone, a rock. You don't see the word even, which is the Hebrew word for stone, in the 10 utterances. It's not there. So how does that come to be? How does that exist? How is that existing today? If there's no word of God making it happen. And like we said, the approach we have is that the world wasn't created from a matter that existed before. Yeah, rather it's something that came from nothing, from God. So where does the stone come from? So the Alter Rebbe, he addresses this in this chapter, and he says that even though you won't find every creation within the 10 utterances, you will find through combination, like we spoke about this already, combination of letters that, and as a descent of energy, as it goes down, and you switch up the letters, the energies are fine-tuned to create the stone, for example. Yeah, this letter switch with the aleph, and then you have another letter switch with the v's, and you end up with a nun, a final nun, and that spells out the word even. Just a little math. This is from the Sefer Yetzirah that I mentioned earlier. It says that there are 231 exchanges of letters. Now, what is that exactly? So I'm not a mathematician, but I'll try to bring out the point that there's 22 letters in the alphabet. Every letter really can be associated with every other letter in the alphabet. Every letter can be associated with all the other letters in the alphabet too. So every one of the 22 letters has association with the other 21. So now let's do the math for a second. How many combinations do you have according to this? 22.
Yes, 22.
The power of 21 times 21 is 462. Now, he said there's 231. How does that fit? So obviously, it's just, it's, the way he said is panim va'acher. It goes both ways. This letter could be switched with this letter, and that letter could be switched with the other letter. So you really have to cut it in half. So what's 462 divided in half? Divided by 2 is 231. Mm-hmm. And that's where that number comes from. Now, there's 2 points I want to get before the class finishes. So let's see if we can do that with the time that we have left. There's just 3 points I want to get to. Okay, so first of all, this helps understand what the Arizal says, that everything has a soul. It says even we know there's 4 categories of creations, of existence. There's things that are the things that are human beings that have intellect or that can speak. There's things that have life and movement, like animals. Then there's the third category is vegetation, things that grow. They don't move around, but they grow at least. And then there's things that are inanimate. They don't move at all. Example, stones, water. So the Arizal, which we could speak on another time when we have time, he says that everything has a soul, even inanimate objects. Even a stone has a soul. What? Where do you see that? It doesn't move. It doesn't do anything. It has no life. Based on what we discussed,
Meaning. It's a meaning more thought.
based on what we discussed, is every creation has energy that's bringing it into existence. Everything does, and it has constant energy flowing into it. And what is that energy? It's the letters themselves. And that brings us to another point, that something unique about the Hebrew language. First of all, we call it Lashon Kodesh, the holy tongue, the holy language, is that it's not, when you have a language, seemingly language is just, I don't know, I have a phone. Now we need to call it something. So let's, we have people around the table, the people on the Zoom. Let's agree to call this phone. That's seemingly what language is. But when it comes to Hebrew, not only is that the word you use to call it, but that every word is associated with that creation. The classic story that goes with this is it speaks about Adam. God said, let's create a human in my image. So the angels didn't want that. So God told the angels, I'm saying this a little quickly, but God told the angels that he's greater than you. He has more wisdom than you. Like, what? We're angels, we're spiritual. What does that mean? So God went ahead, created Adam, and then it says this in the Torah itself. God passed every creation, every animal by Adam, and Adam gave it its name. So you could ask, how does that bring out any wisdom? I don't want to, even little kids can make up names, and they do make up names for stuff. How does that bring out any sort of wisdom? So now we can really, based on what we said, we can really appreciate it. To name something means to see its energy, to see what it's about. To name something in the Hebrew language. It's to identify what it really is, have that real wisdom to understand what it is. And he was able to do that with every animal, to see what its energy, the divine energy behind it, and give it its proper name, the combination of letters that give it its energy and bring it into existence. The way we see this clearly, or at least more spoken about, is when it comes to naming a child. It's said that parents have, we say in Hebrew, Ruach HaKodesh, they have a Holy Spirit that comes upon them when they name their child. Now, why? Because based on what we said, it's very clear. Every person has energy, has a personality behind them. And the Hebrew name that they're given is not just a name that they happen to be called so people can have a tool to call them. Rather, the name represents and is their life, is their energy. And it takes divine wisdom to really be able to see that. And that's why it says that every parent has this divine wisdom brought upon them when they're naming their child. Now, I want to say a story that happened to us, Hindi and I, and maybe we'll finish with that. This story has been told in the synagogue before, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard it, but it's a good story, and it brings out the point well. So we were living in Israel for the last while. We came back to the United States, to Florida, right after Purim, and the reason was because my wife was due right after Pesach, and she wanted to be here near her mother, as you could understand, and she wanted to be here, and so we came back to Florida. So thank God, not long after Passover, we were blessed with a baby girl. And when it comes to the girl, what's interesting is that you don't have a lot of time to think about a name. Maybe you have before, but we didn't want to know the gender, so we only found out after. We actually thought it was a boy the whole time, but when the baby was born, it was a girl. And when it comes to, there's a difference between a girl and a boy. A boy, when do you name the boy? When do you name a baby boy, a Jewish boy?
7 days.
On the eighth day, the Brit Milah, right? That's also the baby naming. So you have a whole week to think about it. With a girl, you don't have that much time. It's the next Torah reading, whenever it is, and we read the Torah 3 times: Monday, Thursday, Shabbat. So whichever one of those days come first, that's when the baby naming is. So you don't really have a lot of time. So the baby was born on Thursday. So we had we had till Shabbat to come up with something. So Shabbat morning. Make a long story short. First, we think about one name. I had a great grandmother who wanted a name after. Okay, well, whatever. I'll skip that part of the story. We're not going to name that one. We're going to name after another great grandmother of mine who I knew very well. I spoke about it at the synagogue here. Her name was Golda. And we looked at the baby and like, look, she loves life. And I remember my great grandmother, she loved life. So I was like, it's perfect. But then my wife Hindi wanted to add another name. She wanted something. She likes Hebrew names, Golda's in Yiddish. So she was trying to think of another name that would click and really represent our child. So she thought of this name, Huva, whatever. She wasn't sure. And it comes, okay, fine, we go to sleep. We gotta go to sleep. And then we wake up in the morning and like, I gotta go to synagogue. And she still wasn't. We still weren't sure. So she went to. So I told her like, you've been locked in, you've been stuck in this room the past literally like 2.5 days. Go walk down the hallway to the Lily Pulitzer, suite, birthing suite. They have like a windows with a nice like view to the water. Maybe like open your mind a little bit. You'll get something. So and I was like, honestly, I hope this works because I really gotta go. The bridge is gonna go up. I'm gonna be late. I'm gonna miss the whole thing. Miss the Torah reading. Anyways, she comes back. And she's like, "That's it. I got it. It's a Huva Golda." And she said like she went to the window there and she just like she felt it settled with her, and she says it's a Huva Golda. That's what it is. I'm like, sure. Great. I literally ran to catch the bridge. Actually, I caught the bridge thing. I think it didn't even go up at all because like there were no boats. Anyways, but the story doesn't end there. Okay, so I named the baby Huva Golda. Evan was surprised. No one saw it coming. Okay, who's Golda? Great grandmother. Who's a Huva? Huva means beloved. Yeah, Ahava means love. Huva means beloved, the one that's loved. So Hindi was like, I love this baby. She's beloved. She is loved. So she wanted to add that name. Then the story doesn't end though. Now that we have the name, good. We have to put it down on paper, whether it's legal documentation for the government, or also there's a custom to buy a letter in the Torah for every Jewish person. If anyone doesn't have a letter in the Sefer Torah, let me know. It's idea of Jewish unity. Everyone's part of a Torah together. Everyone has one letter in the Torah that's theirs. So we were doing that. We needed to know how to write her name in Hebrew. So we reached out to my grandmother how to write the name. So she said, "This probably is, but you know what? I have a picture of the gravestone of my mother. You can look at that." I was like, that's the best place to look. So she sent it, and then we noticed that on the gravestone it said, it's Golda Kastel, and on top of it says, Isha Ahuva Alakol, which means she was a woman that was beloved by everybody. And then it says her name. So right there, where it says Golda, it said Ahuva right on top. Ahuva Golda, and that's her name. Not to go at length about this, but you see, I get this idea that there's divine wisdom that's brought upon the parents when they name their child, and we saw it clearly. We merit to see it. We were able to see it clearly. Again, and that's the idea that we're trying to bring out, that the words that are used in the Hebrew language, that is the raw material itself that creates everything. And then we said that is constantly creating everything.
How old is she now?
She's 3 months and a week or two. She was born April 28th. So that is the topic. We spoke about a lot. I want to give a quick recap. I know we're over time, but it's always important. I was told, you have to say what you're going to say it, and then tell them what you said. So I'm just going to recap quickly what we discussed. We spoke about the Baal Shem Tov's contribution in a few different ways of what was thought before. not theism, not pantheism. Rather, God is greater than the world, but he is within the world. He's relatable also. The world is not something separate from God. World is not only has God organized the world, not only does he create the world from nothing, but he's constantly creating the world from nothing. We spoke about that the divine utterances are constantly what is the material that's creating the world. Not only that it was the instruction to create the world, but it actually constantly is the material that the world is created from. And even things that aren't clearly stated in the 10 utterances, they are by a switching of letters and numerical values. They are also everything really comes from that. Now I know I'm over time. Just because I want to make some practical lesson that we can take from this. Alter Rebbe doesn't in this book doesn't really get into the practical lessons we can take, but there is another place where he writes about this point specifically about constant creation. That if we can think about that, God is constantly creating the world. It means God's constantly involved in the world. And therefore, one of the things that we can take from this is how to deal with anger. Never to get angry. Or never to give up hope. Either one of these. Because if it says anyone that gets angry, it's like serving idol. It's like idol worship. Why does anger have to do with idol worship? Because if someone's angry, it means they think that what happened, what transpired, was not what was supposed to happen. And someone messed it up. That is denying the fact that God is constantly creating the world, every aspect of the world, every part of the world. So if we can think about and accept, and we'll maybe get to understand it logically also next week, but if we can just accept this fact, for now in a way of faith at least, that God is constantly creating the world. It means God's constantly involved in the world. Nothing happens without God's knowledge, God's energy.
The good and the bad?
Yeah, everything. Now there's always a question, why do bad things happen? And that's a separate, philosophical discussion. But never to be angry. If someone does something wrong to you, you don't say almost to the extreme, you don't say they did it. God did it to you, meaning it was supposed to happen. Now, they made the wrong choice. They shouldn't have done it, but God would have had a different way of it happening to you. In regards to what happened to you, the way you received it, that was supposed to happen. And we could talk about more again why bad things happen, and that's a different discussion. But it's never to get angry, because anger means that wasn't supposed to happen, and that's denying the fact that God is constantly creating it. Yeah.
So you are taking out the responsibility of the people that make you angry.
No, very good. So it's a good question. It's really a separate discussion. I'll address it after the class. But the main idea again, in very short, is that God can. He has many ways of accomplishing something. That person had the free choice to be the messenger in this case or not, and God would have found a different way for it to happen. He had the free choice. But in regards to what happened to you, that was divine decree. Now, so that's again something we can live with, something we can take from this. Constant creation means God's constantly involved in the world, which means nothing happens without him knowing about it, without him being involved in it, and therefore never to get angry, because it's always part of God's plan, and it's meant to happen. It was meant to happen. I think it's something that also leads to never giving up hope. Never giving up hope, because the situation that we find ourselves right now, God created that situation this second. Not he created when we were born. He said you're important, but we could have messed it up. If you're alive this second, you say Modani every morning. If you're alive this second, it means that God has something he wants from you in this present situation with all its details and all its aspects. God is making this situation right now at this moment. So I think that's not only it takes away anger, but it gives so much hope, so much meaning to every second of our life. Never to say, I ended up in this situation and now I lost my divine mission. I lost what I was here for, whatever conclusion someone can draw. No, if God not only let you wake up this morning and he gave you your soul this morning, if he's creating you this second right now, then it means that God has something he wants from you. And that's why he's creating you. Just like we say, if God didn't need you, he wouldn't let you be born. If God didn't need you, you wouldn't exist this second. Obviously, God has what he wants from you at every moment. So I think these are the practical lessons we can take from the lofty ideas we spoke about. I wish everyone a good night. Thanks for sticking through even the extra time. And really looking forward to everyone coming back. Again, the next time we're going to speak the logical process to get to this conclusion that God constantly creates the world. So everyone have a good night. Thank you so much for joining. I'd appreciate feedback, whether it's in the chat box or by email, because the classes are for you. So I want to make it as perfect as possible for you guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Will be next.
Thank you.